This game has gone on for quite a bit.
Yeah, and of course, you see the Mutavault. There's an Elvish Mystic. There's a Sylvan Caryatid. But you don't oftentimes walk into a game where there are a ton of Planeswalkers with a bunch of counters on them. And that's the game that we've walked into here. Gains at 15, Braun-Duin at 18. We are in game number 1, unsurprisingly, with this board position. So let's see how this breaks. It's rare that you walk into a game with a Domri emblem and the other person isn't dead.
Yes.
Here's a dissolve on the overloaded Mizium orders.
But it still looks like Levi's pretty comfortably ahead here. By what I can piece together by this particular board state.
Well, this isn't something that you walk into every day, that's for sure. You can see that Gaines does have 2 copies of Sphinx Revelation in his hand, so it does feel like if he gets to untap, he's probably doing pretty well. You do see Domri on the screen there. Because we don't see the emblem very often, you can certainly check out what it does. Creatures you control have double strike, trample, hexproof, and haste.
A lot of powers.
Yes, you are likely dead, as Pelucranos is going to show up now. Let's see if this one resolves. And again, that one, if it does resolve, gets to attack right away. It's got double strike, it's got trample, and we'll see where it goes.
Bear in mind that this Jace is ready to go ultimate too.
Yes,
so there's a lot of things in play that Brian needs to fight over here.
I mean, the good thing here for Brian is that once a creature resolves, it's not going to die outside of Supreme Verdict, or Celestial Flare, something like that. The chances are that thing is not going to be leaving the battlefield for a while. So it gets to get into a Planeswalker. The question is, which one does it get into? Does he even care that Gaines can ultimate Jace?
I would assume so. Normally I care quite a bit when that's about to happen.
I would like to believe so as well. As you see, Elspeth is here at 6. It's going to die now. So 6 tokens are going to be left over. Braun-Duin's going to play a Stomping Ground, pass a turn back, 15, 18 in life totals, but that's going to change as 5 cards and 5 life are coming here for Gaines. 3, 4, 5. So he's sitting at his original life total of 20. And wow, that was pretty good. A couple of Supreme Verdicts and Zorius Charm hanging out there. Charm not going to be as good because it's not going to put anything back on top of the deck. We'll make sure that Gaines does put that Supreme Verdict that's in the middle of the table into the graveyard here momentarily.
Doesn't just get to stay there.
It's like an emblem, right? You just get to. It's
like at the start of my turn, I get to draw X.
Yeah, it's like a Vanguard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see how Gaines wants to go through this turn. Maybe he wants to attack and reset the board with a Wrath. Maybe try to get that Domri out the table. But once there's already one emblem in play, how much do you actually care about the other Domri that's out there?
Well, with Levi's in a spot now where he can still rev a lot and draw a bunch of cards and actually just out attrition Brian's draw steps as long as Domri's not in play. He can, the emblem doesn't make things uncounterable, and Levi's at a pretty healthy life total, so.
Looks like Mutavaults want to get in. We got 1 activation. It looks like we might see a second one. It's not a lock, but okay. Yep. So those are firing us. That can be attacked for 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of damage here.
Well, I suppose we're not planning on going after Pelucranos at this point.
Yeah, he's going to actually get Domri off of the board. Okay. Now, will he reset the board with the Supreme Verdict? Because that means he'd have to lose his Mutavaults in order to do that.
He's got he's got quite a bit of insurance in his hand with both having Dissolve and Supreme Verdict, so he can afford to play this next couple of turns fairly conservatively because he's got a lot of stuff covered.
And then reload with a Revelation.
Yep.
Certainly wants to decide what he wants to do here. Decisions.
I mean, I have to assume that we're going to be searching our deck this turn for an answer to that Pelucranos and some additional threat card. Alright, just replacing some tokens here.
Even if we replace them and they all die. Yeah, he's like, thanks for the tokens. Verdict. All right.
Well, full reset.
Well, this is the Mutavaults in the exchange. Jace is going to tick up. It's interesting because I don't know how good an ultimate of Jace is in this particular matchup because Gaines doesn't have a creature in his deck to actually go get. He doesn't have like an Aetherling to go get out of his deck. And then what's he going to grab from Braun-Duin's deck that is really all that impressive? I think like the best of the bunch is Stormbreath Dragon,
I
which
mean, getting
obviously is
a
fine.
getting an Elspeth and a Stormbrat Dragon seems fine.
Does he have another Elspeth to grab? I guess if he hasn't used their Elspeth yet, because one we know is in the graveyard, and then he has two copies. We don't know where the other one is right now. As Braun-Duin just draws his card and passes the turn back. I think he's about to be dumped in an avalanche of cards here via Revelation.
I mean, if you actually want to keep his Jason play, I guess that's an argument for holding off one turn.
That's true. All right, so the Elspeth is still in his deck, and he's going to go grab that. He's going to check to make sure that there's anything better that he can find. So there's the Planeswalker, and we'll see what he does grab here from Braun-Duin's deck. You don't see the ultimate on Jace very often, but for each player, search that player's library, for a non-land card and exile it. Then that player shuffles his or her library. You may cast those cards without paying their mana cost. So basically, you go through your deck, you pick a card. You go through their deck, you pick a card, and you put it into play.
Yep. Usually, this is good enough to win the game. It also implies that your Jace has been in play unchecked for multiple turns. So very rarely have I seen a Jace ultimate defeated.
It's no Jace the Mind Sculptor ultimate, but it's close.
Happens a little bit faster.
Yeah, they'll oftentimes win the game. It also doesn't feel as hopeless when this one goes off. Like, you feel like, okay, I might be able to get back into this one. It might be a little bit tough, but I might be able to get back. And Stormbreath Dragon and Elspeth are the choices of the day here for Gaines with the ultimate there of Jace. 3 soldier tokens going to come in. Stormbreath, of course, has haste, so that'll probably come in as well.
And keep in mind, Levi's doing all this still with a Revelations and a Dissolve in his hand. So he's got Brian's draw steps pretty effectively covered as well.
Take a look at the top card here with the Temple. That's going to the bottom. See, Azorius Charms there. Again, that's not going to be able to put anything on top because of that Domri emblem. But Stormbreath Dragon does get into the red zone, so Braun-Duin being attacked by his own monster, going to put him down to 14.
Hoisted by his own petard.
Yeah, it is a rough way to go.
Yeah.
Brian draws a card. Did not look to be of much relevance. I know he's holding a land. He has a Mutavault among his lands right now, but there's not a... I mean, I guess the attack with that is fine, because, again, it does have Double Strike and Trample. So the attack with it would actually be favorable. It just isn't very exciting.
Yeah, it's a pretty low harm attack.
I think this is Elvish Mystic, yeah. That's a lower harm attack.
I mean, the biggest issue right now is Brian's going to even struggle to race Azorius Charm and the Dragon. So any additional cards in hand are really, really challenging to win against, and Levi has a lot of them.
An attempt at an overloaded Museum Warriors does get dissolved. The scry will occur. And then again, we'll see if that Mutavault's going to fire up or not here. Again, there's no guarantee that Braun-Duin is dead in this game. He's obviously in a very rough position. But that Domri emblem really can turn the game around if he is able to cobble together some favorable draw steps.
Yeah, it definitely makes all of his draws way more powerful than they otherwise would be. That's for sure. But Levi has a really substantial foothold in this game right now.
Mutavault's going to go active. And we're going to see where it's going. Because you can see Brian's going to be firing away with something. I think he might be going after that Elspeth. Maybe Jace? Okay. So Mutavault's going to go towards Jace. We'll get exactly where the attacks are going. It looked like it wants to go to Jace. It looked like it wants to go to Elspeth. So we'll see which creature's going where. Looks like Jace is going to bite the dust, and then Elspeth is going to go down to 3. Okay, so the Alpha's going over to Mystic. The Mutavault takes care of Jace, and then Brian just passes the turn back. Here's an Azorius Charm cycle on the end step here. And, if you're looking at the card count thinking, could he deck himself? The answer is no, of course. Elixir Mortality will prevent that.
And he could even, at this point, Levi could just save one of those Azorius Charms to give his team lifelink this turn to get him even further out of range.
The hidden mode.
Yes.
On Azorius Charm. It's a secret. In come the soldiers and the dragon. Attack here for 4, 5, 6, 7. Going to put Braun-Duin down to 7. 3 more soldiers coming here from the 6-mana Planeswalker. And again, I think Gaines probably comfortable just passing the turn here with Revelation up. Saying, in case you're able to deal me some inordinate amount of damage, I can make sure that I gain enough life that won't matter.
Yeah. Sitting back here with Rev seems like a pretty safe place to be.
Agreed. Agreed.
And so I assume, yeah, Levi just passing it back here.
Brian's going to untap all those lands, Mutavault among them. I'll take a draw. Not quite sure what it was. We'll see momentarily. As Gaines does pull that Revelation to the front of his hand. It's a safe place to be.
Like Brian's really in the squeeze now because he needs to threaten Elspeth, and yeah, there's no way to leave enough blockers back in that world. So
I think he realized that too. There's just really no way to get out of the situation, which is strange to say that you do have a Domri emblem and unable to actually do anything to get yourself out of that situation. A really weird game that we cut into there. That's what kind of makes Magic great. You just don't really know how the games are going to go all the time. We cut into a game with a Domri emblem and a Domri on 8.
Yep, 9.
A 9? Yeah, and you would think, oh, wow, Brian's probably kicking his butt. It's like, no, you're getting crushed, actually.
Yeah, it means the game's probably gone on for too many turns.
Yeah. I don't know how you get to a game where a Domri Emblem's in play, another Domri's on 9, but Gaines was able to craft that position and win that game. So Levi Gaines is up a game here over Braun-Duin. Blue-White Control versus Green Monsters. We'll take a look at BBD's sideboard here, where we at least know Mistcutter Hydras are coming in.
Yep, 4 Mistcutter Hydras. Those are easy includes. And a copy of Rorikthar seems excellent here.
Agreed.
As we saw yesterday on camera.
The old all-spell deck.
Against the all-spell deck. And Brian also has access to Destructive Revelry if he's feeling like he wants to fight over Detention Sphere. Okay. So that strikes me as pretty narrow.
Take a look at Gaines' sideboard here really quickly. 1 copy of Blind Obedience, a Ratchet Bomb, 2 copies of Celestial Flare, a Python Needle, a Jace Memory Adept, 2 Gainsay, 2 Negate, an Aetherling, 2 Glare of Heresy, and 2 copies of Domestication. The Flares are going to come in to take care of the Dragons. I think that's a step in the right direction. Needle has a lot of uses in this matchup.
Planeswalkers.
Beautiful. Dragon. You got a lot of good options there, so I think that's going to want to come in. Jace Memory Adept, a really expensive card drawing engine. I'm not entirely convinced that he's going to need that. Gainsay going to stay on the board, but Negate could come in here because Planeswalkers.
Yes.
A lot of choices. Aetherling, if Gaines feels like he needs a creature to be able to close the game out maybe a little bit quicker, go away from the approach of recycling Elixir of Mortality and Revelations, and actually just want to close the game out with the hard-to-kill creature. Glare of Heresy not going to be used in this matchup. The Domestication, the creatures are much too big.
Much too big.
Yeah, to find use in this matchup here. So, not a lot of changes for him, but the cards that he is going to bring in, I think, are going to have an impact in their sideboarded games.
Yeah, and that's often the way that these blue-white decks sideboard is. Their main decks are trying to beat everything through some counters and some Sphinx's Revelations. That's your primary game plan. And then in the post-board games, you can get a lot more surgical about what you're trying to fight over.
Quick update for you guys in other matches. We had told you a little while ago that Raymond Perez was up a game over Daniel Cato. Well, things have changed. Dan Cato does win that match 2-1, so he'll be playing against Owen Turtenwald in our next match in the semifinals. Andrew Shrout, green-white aggro, still doing it. Wins 2-0. Wins 2-0. He'll be playing the winner of this match here. So we saw Shrout make the top 8 of the Invitational in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago with the green-white aggro deck. Very innovative deck with main deck Skylashers, main deck Mistcutter Hydras. You often think of the Hydra as a sideboard card against specific decks, but Shrout has really liked this deck and has put up some nice finishes with it. Back-to-back top 8s.
Yeah, and I mentioned multiple times on the broadcast yesterday, no Smiters. A Selesnya given for as long as it's been printed, and Andrew has decided to eschew those in favor of some more metagame-oriented creatures. So, obviously being rewarded for the changes he's made to that deck.
And again, on the other side, we saw Turtenwald win pretty quickly against Michael Kennedy playing Burn. So he'll be playing against, as we mentioned, Dan Cato, who, again, an old-school guy from Detroit, Michigan, owns a game store up there. If you follow Magic as long as I have, and it's kind of interesting because I played in that area from Cleveland, so PTQ'd up in Detroit. Seeing him at PTQs when I was much younger during my grinding days, and he was the guy that you didn't want to play against at Detroit PTQ because that's the guy who got 9th place at Pro Tour New Orleans with RDW. Were you at Pro Tour New Orleans?
No, I was not qualified. I did go down there to hang out and to
Okay.
play in grinders, but I missed my flight.
Ooh.
So I ended up just hanging out during the week. It was my first of many tournaments where showed up and just sort of kicked it for the weekend.
Ah, yes, those hangouts.
Yep.
That is infamously known as the Tinker PT, correct?
Yep. That was one of the times that our team actually had a good deck.
Oh, very nice, very nice. You
It
guys
was not often.
were you guys tinkering?
We were tinkering. Antonino De Rosa was a big advocate for 4 main deck copies of Chalice of the Void, which
Okay.
was not an industry standard in that tournament.
Okay.
And that was what separated our list from the Tinker list, the other Tinker lists in the tournament.
Now, Tinker is an interesting card here because you think of Tinker, and it's really funny because like for me, it's like, oh, Tinker and Cube, Tinker's busted in Cube. I don't think people really understand how busted Tinker was back then with the things that you could do with it. I mean, you could search for Memory Jar. I think was legal then.
No, memory
No?
jar was not
Memory Jar-
legal.
Okay, so what were like some of the things that you were tinkering for? back in
Phyrexian
the day?
processor,
Okay.
uh, the the mirror cube, the sack this and remove any number of artifacts from your deck to make it 1/1 for each
Mirror Incubator.
mirror incubator.
Okay.
Uh, what were the other? Oh, you could get a Mishra's Helix and just lock them out of the game.
Okay.
That was a thing you could do.
Okay.
Um,
Academy legal?
no,
No. Okay.
it wasn't that. It wasn't that far in the
Well,
Stone
I'm
Age.
just asking. I'm just asking, man. I was not at that pro tour.
Mox Sapphire was not legal. Also,
No. Okay, that's good. Black Lotus.
no, it was not legal.
You couldn't do that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think also people were playing like a Mana Severance Belcher deck at that tournament.
Yep, that was a
Okay.
thing too.
Okay.
OSIP infamously lost. Oh, Belcher, that was the other thing that you could tinker for in some spots.
Okay.
Also, other decks we didn't have Belcher, but OSIP lost to 1,000,000 Belchers that tournament and was really steaming about it.
I remember a local from Ohio had qualified for that tournament and had tested at the local game store with everybody, and he ended up going down there with The Rock.
Good old honest rock.
Yeah, he was playing The Rock, and his deck, it had a lot of one-ofs. There was a Living Wish package.
Nice.
And I think I remember his game plan against people was to Living Wish for Volrash Stronghold and grind them down
Yeah, very common.
in the Tinker Pro Tour.
That's
How do
real-
you think he did it that? How do you think he
probably
did it that one?
probably pretty poorly. if I
Not
had to
so
guess.
good. Not so good. Yeah.
At Pro Tour Houston, the one that Justin Gary's won, the one that Justin Gary won,
Okay.
I was gonna play Blue Black Reanimator, the same list that our team was playing, which was the worst deck in the tournament.
Ah, nice. Very nice.
Fortunately / unfortunately, my deck was stolen 2 days before the tournament. So I showed up to Houston with no deck
Okay.
and basically had to build the Rock out
Okay.
of Gerard's backpack.
Okay.
Like the green and black cards that Gerard Fabiano owned. That's the deck that I played in the Pro Tour.
Oh, very nice.
So if you want to see a real doozy of a deck list,
Whew.
you can go check out the Houston coverage. But I remember, round 1 I'm playing. I go turn 1 Bird, turn 2 Spike Feeder. There were 2 in the deck. Turn 3 Spike Weaver, 2 in the deck.
Okay.
Because Gerard owned 2.
Sure.
Turn 4 Deranged Hermit, 1 in the deck because Gerard owned 1. Against a Red Deck Wins player.
Okay.
Just crush him.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is going to be the easiest tournament ever. Sitting next to me, Mike Turian's playing against some nonsense. But then I got killed on turn 2 a bunch of times. And
Justice prevails.
my deck had 4 Mesmeric Fiends and 4 Pernicious Deeds, if memory served. I mean, this was not good. But,
It's questionable deck building at best.
well, in fairness, I was constrained by the 500 or so cards that Gerard owned. 'Cause
Sure.
That's how I had to build my deck.
That's fair. That's fair.
I was broke and had no cards, so.
Bringing it back to booth here for you guys as BBD is using the restroom really quickly, so we don't want you to have to stare at that. Plus, it's kind of story time right now. But Kato, kind of bringing it full circle, I don't think that RGW was a very popular deck at that particular tournament. But
no,
I Rack and Ruin and stuff was really going on.
I wasn't qualified for that Pro Tour. I was playing Red Deck Wins and helping the team test.
Okay.
So I was our Red Deck Win player. And the deck was actually okay-ish against some Tinker decks. Obviously, being on the play versus on the draw mattered a lot, but there were some draws they got that couldn't function through a port or a wasteland.
Mhm.
But if they had any sort of monolith draw, you just lost the game.
Sure.
But the actual percentages on the matchup were not horrible for Red Deck Wins, and you could sideboard into Rack and Ruin or Fiashino Heretic or a number of pretty hateful cards if you want to go down that road.
You can certainly go look up the coverage of Pro Tour New Orleans. That's actually kind of where I started following Magic, and back then I was. This is 2003, so I was 7. No, it was, I was 16 or 17 then, and to see the things that were taking place that term, I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. It's just like, oh, he got a Bosch Iron Golem play really fast. That's sweet. He
Yeah,
took all the lands out of his deck and activated Belcher with via Mana Severance. That's pretty sweet.
that is pretty
I
sweet.
could probably compete at this tournament. No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. The Sylvan Caryatid is going to come into play here for BBD. There's a Hollowed Fountain there for gains, so see how this game plays out. If it's going to be anything like the first one, as Brian's going to roll up his sleeves, maybe it's time to
Xenagos.
maybe
That's
it's
a
time to
roll.
get into the kitchen. Yeah,
That's a roll up the sleeves. That rolling up the sleeves. That means a Xenagos is coming.
absolutely. So there is the Reveler. I think we're going to have a Satyr token show up here momentarily and get into the red zone.
Time to do some work.
I was going to say, yeah, it's time to do the dirty work here. Give me a Planeswalker, give me some Satyr tokens, and let's get into the red zone. An attack for 2 is going to put Gaines down to 18, but you do see Gaines in his hand. He does have a Detention Sphere to take care of that Planeswalker. Not sure if Brian has a copy of Destructive Revelry in his hand right now or not.
Yeah, but even for, this is the kind of game that Brian wants to play where Levi is forced to tap out and respond on his own turn,
Yes.
opening up windows for Brian to resolve future spells.
When Brian draws another Planeswalker for the turn, he does have Chandra Pyromaster in his hand now. So a card that I think is going to end up seeing a lot of play at some point over its shelf life. It's starting to make its way in sideboards right now, and it's certainly good in this matchup. Not great, not as good as Xenagos, not as good as Domri, but it does have its functionality here.
It's more pressure that doesn't play into Supreme Verdict, which is the real thing that Brian's in the market for here.
Brian going to cast Destructive Revelry, so he does have the trump to Detention Sphere. Gaines is going to take 2, and it looks like he's going to end up taking 4 from attacks as well. Maybe even a Mutavault getting into the red zone here.
Yeah, I mean this board almost forces a Supreme Verdict on its own.
I agree.
And leaves Brian with a lot of leftovers.
One of the better naturalizes ever printed here in Destructive Revelry. Let's see what else Brian wants to do on this turn. He's going to drop the Elvish Mystic. He's going to tick up the Xenagos. That's going to be 3. That's going to be 4. There's a Chandra. So now he's got 2 Planeswalkers to play. That's a really, really impressive turn there. Chandra is going to go to the Dome, deal 1 that way. Satyr can come across 2, and immediately Gaines is in a lot of trouble.
And we brought this up a couple times. The Monsters deck, when it has a Mana Accelerate, is kind of a different animal than the games that it doesn't.
Yes.
This is a pretty good board to have on the 4th turn.
Yeah, I don't know if it's correct to mulligan to Mana Accelerants, but it almost feels that way because you just have such a different deck when you're accelerating into... I mean, look what he's been able to put together on turn 4. This is through a Detention Sphere.
Yeah.
It's really, really impressive.
Well, the problem is the deck's got... The mana of the deck is not great, and you also need to have enough threats to impact things, so you can't be mulliganing too aggressively, but I do agree there are times where it just feels like the deck is so different when it has an accelerant versus when it doesn't that you should be searching.
Jace Architect of Thought's going to come into play. That's going to tick on up to 5. So the creatures get a little bit weaker. The question here is how much does Brian actually care about that Jace? Does he even care about attacking that or just building a better board and just getting the red zone with Gaines sitting at 13 right now?
Well, I'm fairly sure this turn he has Garrett Caller of Beast, which he can cast through his Xenagos if he's feeling so inclined. I think you want to pressure Jace with whatever you have kind of left over. And, it's better to attack Jace than to be dealing a couple extra points of damage here. But it's definitely not a huge priority for Brian to get Jace off the table at this juncture.
Yeah, getting Garrett on the table is certainly appealing right now. Having 3 Planeswalkers, generating that much card advantage a turn. Almost feels like a no-brainer, but we'll see what PBD does want to do. He's going to start by the Satyr token, and now we'll see a Gorkland Rampager. Blood Rush, that's going to be a 6-power attacker, actually 5 because of the Jace -1 effect, but that'll be enough to get it off the table. And now, Brian going to, looks like he's going to be ticking up. So that'll be 3, 4, 5, 6. Ring, ring, ring. Caller of the Beast is here.
Sure.
No
big deal.
It's just an average draw.
Okay.
Yeah, Gaines is just going to concede the game. As Brian felt like he was comboing there. His draw was absolutely fantastic that game. My goodness.
Yep.
He's going to even it up here.
And that's the recipe that Brian needs in these games is acceleration to Planeswalkers. He can only be so all in on creatures because of Supreme Verdict, random other removal that Levi has access to, but the games where his Planeswalkers are able to stick, he's got a pretty huge edge. Because the Planeswalkers not only are not playing into Supreme Verdict, they're also as good at threatening Levi's life total as the creatures are, and they're not playing into Supreme Verdict. So um, you can see Brian's sideboard plan involves being more Planeswalker oriented with additional copies of Chandra, and in that game, Levi had a Supreme Verdict in his hand that really didn't do anything.
No, not at all. I mean, he did deploy a Jason. Even if he had chose not to deploy Jason, it chose to cast Supreme Verdict instead. I still think he's in a terrible situation. That
Yeah,
he's
I mean,
in.
Detention Sphere into Jace is not a bad curve either.
No,
Not like he didn't do anything.
yeah, it's not like it was a bad keep. It was that Brian's draw was absolutely insane. So you see both players shuffling back up here. Not sure if they're going to go back to the sideboards or not. They do look like they're happy. Again, both players do have access to each other's deck lists as they are given to each player in the elimination round. So no more surprises here. Maybe a surprise on how a player does sideboard, but you'll know the 75 cards that they have access to in the games that you play.
I mean, if you're in Levi's position now, you've seen Destructive Revelry. You see Brian's not going back to his sideboard. Do you consider removing your Detention Spheres?
I don't think that you can. It's just too powerful of a card in the matchup, and you just have to hope that things line up appropriately. Maybe Brian doesn't draw one because he doesn't have any manipulation in his deck. He only has 2 copies of Revelry in his sideboard. Sphere is so powerful at taking care of Planeswalkers, I can't imagine boarding it out.
This is all true. I'm always just too enticed when the opportunity to strand my opponent with dead cards presents itself in sideboarding games.
Sure.
I'm willing to go through some serious hoops to make that happen. So if I were in Levi's seat, I would strongly consider going back to the board and seeing if there's any way to present 60 cards that are reasonable that don't involve any enchantments or artifacts. But like you said, since they're his best answers to Planeswalkers, which are Brian's best cards against him, he's sort of committed to leaving that stuff in, even though he's aware that Brian has Destructive Revelry.
I find it really interesting, too, because, with Attention Sphere, there's no arguing how powerful that card is, and it's a card that really does hold the blue-white decks together to be able to move from the early to mid-game into the late game, which is where they're at their best, resolving large revelations, casting Elspeth, and everything else that they do. But a lot of the time, especially when they're playing against a deck like this, you just always think about how great Planar Cleansing is against a deck like this, but you can't play a deck that has Planar Cleansing and Attention Sphere in it for obvious reasons. It's just kind of unfortunate with the way the things line up that, I think that a blue-white player would like to play both of those cards, but because it's so important for Detention Sphere to bridge the game from moving to the early to mid to late, and being this unique answer that really just covers all corner cases, and the fact that cleansing would be so good, but since it blows up your spheres and it just doesn't work very well, you can't just play both awesome cards.
Yeah, no, there are definitely huge costs, when constructing your decks, and you could move into a build that had more counter spells and planar cleansing and hope to bridge your early turns just through counters and cycling and maybe celestial flare type effects, but Detention Sphere is just such a powerful catch-all, particularly against planeswalkers, and if anyone's actually prepared to fight you, it's almost certainly with planeswalkers or underworld connections or some permanent that's not a creature that's threatening your life total or your resources somehow.
All right, so in this third and final game, Levi Games will be on the play. Blue-white control versus green-red monsters. We'll see if BBD can put together a draw like he had last time. Again, you can see the difference with Man Acceleration. Man Acceleration is even more important on the draw, I would argue, than on the play. So we'll see if he's able to find some of that for this particular game as both players are laying out their opening hands.
Yeah, and since he's already behind on the back foot, it is really important for him to get out of the gates as fast as possible.
All right, it looks like both players happy. Game 3 underway here with a tapped Hallowed Fountain for Gains and a tapped Stomping Grounds here for BBD. See a Azorius Gilgate here for Gains, pass the turn back. See if Brian does have acceleration on this turn. He's just going to pass the turn back. So there is a Xenagos hanging out in his hand, but he's off to a much slower start, which I think favors Gains because he's not underneath any pressure at this point.
Yep.
He can basically resolve a Jace, which he does have in his hand, and not worry about it dying, which is a good feeling as Braun-Duin is going to play just a mountain and pass the turn.
It doesn't appear that way on the board, but I believe that Brian's already in a ton of trouble the way this game is starting.
I agree 100%. Not getting under the board here. Allowing Gains to just kind of get set up and play a Jace with nothing out there on the table. Jace is going to move up to 5. Braun-Duin's going to take a draw. Does have a Mistcutter Hydra in his hand. Can't play a Xenagos on this turn since Gaines' shields are down, but he's got to get to work here. He's got to get some things on the table. I don't expect an explosive draw like we saw last game because I feel like that's kind of the minority. But he needed a little bit more than this, which Xenagos at least a good start.
Yeah, I mean, Levi's already getting to the point where he can land Elspeth shortly on a fairly uncontested board.
So Jace ticks down to 4. Temple of Silence is where Gaines is going to start. Take a look at the top card. Put it back so he's happy. Jace going upstairs. So Cumberstone effect, is in play for this particular turn, as Braun-Duin will take a draw step.
What a reference.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would have gone with reverse Urkish Oriflame, perhaps. I was trying to out old school you, but
I don't know.
Cumberstone's quite.
I don't know what that card is.
It was an alpha.
Yep.
It was really good with Elvish Archers. Look it up.
Patrick, it's 2014. I don't know if you know that. And I'm not looking that up. See how Brian wants to go through this turn. It's not played a land yet, so there's his 5th mana. Now here's a Stormbreath Dragon. So basically forcing Gaines to have a counterspell, because this card is actually quite difficult for blue-white to get off the board if it doesn't counter it. So the Dragon's going to come over here along with the Satyr token. So this is going to attack for 3, 4, 5. Azorius Charm can take care of one of the Satyrs. Not the best use of Charm, because I'm not denying a draw step. But now Jace is down to 1. And now what this does is it forces Gaines to have either a Verdict or Elspeth to get the job done. But even casting Elspeth and minusing it right now is not very good, because then it's just going to die to Xenagos.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see Levi fight over the Elspeth that turn. To fight over the Xenagos token, rather, that turn. As it seems really hard for him to protect his Jace going forward.
There's your Verdict. Going to clear everything up. Now, again, don't forget, Brian does have copies of Mistcutter Hydra in his hand right now that he can use to take care of that Jace if he decides that's what he wants to do. Gaines does just have 1 untapped mana. Doesn't represent very much. Maybe a cycle of Quicken. That's just about it. You see his hand right now. He does have Celestial Flare. He does have that Elspeth and a land. Xenagos token is going to come into play. Braun-Duin's going to cast another Dragon. He's going to get the attack on. Get rid of your Jace and attack you for 1 after the Cumberstone effect does take place. So Gaines going to take a little bit of damage here, but now this is really going to tax that Elspeth, because he's got to minus it to take care of the Dragon, because it's very difficult for the blue-white deck to get it off of the board. Detention Tree obviously not going to do it. Azorius Charm not going to do it. So Elspeth has to do a lot of the work here, but if Elspeth does come into play in minus, it's going to die the next turn.
And this is why, if I was in Levi's position, I don't think I would have Azorius Charm the token last turn. It just seemed better to cycle in that spot. It's so hard to protect his Jace going forward if he's not going to play Elspeth the following turn. And, here we are now with the Jace basically dying the following turn for very little impact.
So you see Gaines' hand. He's got that Flare. He's got that Revelation that was drawn this turn. He's got that Elspeth. He does not have the best tools at this point. Also, as he's staring down that Stormbreath Dragon, don't forget as well that, of all the things the Stormbreath Dragon does in this matchup, protection from white, haste, flyer, they can attack Planeswalkers. The Monstrosity is certainly important as well against a deck that's going to have a lot of cards in its hand.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a struggle for, Levi to kill Stormbreath Dragon in general, and he's going to have a lot of cards in his hand because he's reactive, he's casting Revelations, the Monstrosity on that card's a real thing.
So, so Elspeth is going to come in. It's going to -1 to take care of the Dragon, which is one of the few ways they can actually get the job done on it. So it's not a favorable trade here for Gaines at all, but had to do what he had to do.
And Brian now firmly in the driver's seat, full cards in hand. Levi's expending a lot of resources just to try to keep the board stable, and he's losing his Planeswalkers in the process.
Another Satyr token is going to come into play here for Braun-Duin. He's going to tap 5 mana again. This is a Boon Satyr that's going to get enchanted. Excuse me, it's going to get bestowed upon the Satyr token. So 2 this way, 6 that way. Gaines is going to move down to 13, and he's going to lose his Elspeth here. So again, he's in some real trouble right now. And Brian is sandbagging those Mistcutter Hydras really nicely, because what he can do is he can generate some very large ones with Xenagos ticking up and put a lot of mana into it. You see Gaines draw Detention Sphere for the turn, which oftentimes would be a pretty good draw, but what do you want to target here?
I think at this point, Levi just needs to say go and Revelate and try to set up a Detention Sphere plus Supreme Verdict turn.
Okay.
He can't just the board's gotten too bad. He can't really make any incremental progress on it anymore. As long as he can survive this following turn, I think he's better off revving and trying to catch up all in one shot.
Well, BBD is going to figure out how he wants to approach momentarily. It looks like Gaines is trying to figure out what he wants to do in his turn, if he wants to cast a spell or not. Again, he's got the Revelation, he's got the Sphere, and if he wants to target anything with that. So we'll see how he wants to approach his turn. If he does just want to pass, or if he does want to cast his makeshift Oblivion Ring.
I mean, he can't. Detention Sphering Xenagos doesn't make a lot of progress because there's so much pressure on the board. And Detention Sphering the Satyrs also doesn't do it a lot because Xenagos and the Boon Satyr stick around. So with no good target, it's probably better off to just Rev. Because Brian is a little bottlenecked on mana right now, and if Levi can find a Supreme Verdict to pair with his Detention Sphere, Brian might be a little just too bottlenecked to be able to deploy his threats efficiently. And with another Revelation or something, it's not inconceivable for Levi to catch back up.
I think the problem here is I think Boon Satyr's the guy that really puts the wrench in that plans. As if we do have a Verdict turn plus a Detention Sphere taking your Xenagos, the Boon Satyr's going to be left over because of the Bestow and the creatures dying. And then, you're being attacked for 4, and Mistcutter Hydra's going to have haste, and we know that Brian has one of those in his hand. So, I don't know, it just seems really, really tough for him to get back in this game, as Brian's going to make a token and now cast a Hydra for 4. So he's getting in the red zone here for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This is an attack for 14.
Yep. And I think that, I mean, now this definitely just forces a Rev.
Yeah. Which I'm sure Brian knew that was coming, and he doesn't really care.
Given how long Levi took on his turn and eventually said go, I think Brian was able to deduce that he was debating between revelating or doing something to the board.
So cards to the grip here for Gaines. You can certainly see how much difficult things get after sideboard here for the blue-white control deck.
I mean, just Xenagos resolving was that. I mean, that's the whole game.
Yeah. It's just really, really bad news. And part of the reason that, in the deck tech with Chris Vanameter, which you guys can see on our coverage page about this deck, where he's just felt that Xenagos is one of the best cards in this deck, criminally underplayed at this point, is just look how much of an effect it has had on this game alone.
Yep.
It was his first play of the game. It has not left the table, and it has created this gigantic mess that you see here.
And now, Levi can survive the turn by Detention Sphering the Satyrs and then playing Supreme Verdict, but then any sort of additional leftover kills him because he's at 3 and the Xenagos is still in play.
And we know that Braun-Duin, I believe, has another copy of Mistcutter Hydra in his hand, so. And that's what you're going to see. You'll see D-Sphere. It's going to take care of the Satyr tokens. And now Verdict's going to clean this stuff up. And I wouldn't be surprised to see here a quick flash of a Mistcutter Hydra here from Brian. Yeah, he's going to untap quickly and confidently, draw a card, slam down a Mistcutter Hydra that's uncounterable, and Gaines will extend the hand. Brian Braun-Duin, number 2 in your leaderboard race, is going to move on to the semifinals here. He'll be playing against Andrew Shrout in the semifinals here. Green-Red Monsters, we got 2 of them in the semis.
Pretty high-profile matchup coming up, too.